This is a formative evaluation of a behavioural instructional pilot intervention which really draws on two manuals, Stepping Stones in Creating Futures, in urban informal settlements in South Africa. It's a big study involving a team from the Medical Research Council and an NGO, Project of Power, as well as my own unit I'm involved in at Herd. So really, informal settlements in South Africa have twice the prevalence of HIV compared to other settlement types, and gender-based violence is a huge problem. And similar patterns of HIV and GBV are seen regionally and probably globally. Combination interventions or structural interventions can potentially address these intimately connected health problems, but models to date have shown limitations. Microfinance interventions have not been shown to work very well for young people, and cash transfer interventions are often very expensive to deliver. So there's a core challenge is to develop a livelihood strengthening intervention for youth that can be delivered at reasonable cost and has potential scalability. Really, we build off two kind of seminal interventions within South Africa. The image study, which showed a gender empowerment intervention combined with microfinance, reduced older women's experience of intimate partner violence by 55%. The Stepping Stone study, which many people will know, showed a reduction in new HSV-2 infections by a third in men and women involved in that study amongst school-going aged young people. And young men's perpetration of intimate partner violence was also reduced by 38% 2 years after the start of the study. However, Stepping Stones did not reduce women's experience of intimate partner violence. And one of the hypothesized reasons in qualitative follow-up work was that the material context made it too hard for women to change. So we hypothesized that it is necessary to economically empower women to enable them to take action to protect themselves against men's violence. So we took two interventions. Stepping Stones is widely known across the world. It's been used globally. It was first developed by Alice Wellborn for use in Uganda in 1995. The version we used is the Stepping Stones South African adaptation, the third edition. It's got 10 sessions, each of about 3 hours long. The sessions are listed, but include things like listening and communication, sex and love, gender-based violence, and communication skills. And really it's trying to push young people to start to think through what are the underlying causes for the ways in which they act around sexual health and reproductive health, as well as violence. To this, we developed and added another intervention called Creating Futures. This was created by the project team. It was 11 sessions long. And while Stepping Stones focuses on gender and reproductive health, this focused much more on livelihoods. And in encouraging young people to critically reflect on and analyze their livelihoods and develop concrete skills that they could use to strengthen livelihoods. So it also included a range of sessions, including resources you needed for livelihoods, social resources, saving and budgeting, and coping with shocks. In total, it was about a 60-hour intervention, which is significantly longer than many interventions developed. In addition, it was a single sex, so groups were single sex, with one session where men and women were brought together. So just to quickly run through the methods for the intervention. The combined intervention was delivered into informal settlements near Durban, South Africa, over about a 12-week period. We had 232 young people. Participants were trained primarily, as I've said, in single-sex groups by trained peer facilitators. This was a pilot study, so we weren't looking to show that it had a conclusive impact. Rather, we sought to show promise from the intervention. Because of this, we did a slightly different design. We didn't have a control group, which is obviously a major limitation, but we interviewed participants twice before we started the intervention, and then re-interviewed them at 6 and 12 months. We had quite high retention rates in the study, which was also something we were quite concerned about ensuring, because these are young people from informal settlements, they've got lots of mobility. So we wanted to ensure that if we were to do this again, we could actually retain them in the overall study. So here's a bit of the background details of the participants at baseline. I just really want to flag a few things. 80% of them were under 25, And they had incredibly low levels of education. Only 45% of men and 23% of women had actually completed their schooling. And relatively high rates of having children. So a third of men and 2/3 of women reported that they had at least one biological child. And now we'll move on to the results, which are presented in a very complex table, but I will talk you through it. So these are trying to show the results from, if we look left to right, we've got the measures before the intervention happened and the measures after the intervention happened. And for people who are very interested, the p-values. But to make sense of this, what we did see in terms of earnings, so mean earnings in the last month, and we report this in round, both women and men saw statistically significant increases in their earnings over the 12 months, so between 280 and 345% increase. And they also saw improvements in their feelings about their work situation. They felt better about kind of their work position at that point. And both of those were statistically significant. Sterling, because they were hungry, also declined over this time period for women and men. But more widely, we didn't see an impact on food insecurity, which we measured through hunger in the last week or month, or their engagement or participation in crime more generally. If we turn to look at kind of the gender-related indicators, we see quite a mixed picture. Both women and men reported statistically significant improvements in gender attitudes over the 12-month follow-up. Further, men also reported a significant improvement in their relationship control. Essentially, they became less controlling in their relationships towards women, but women did not increase their power in relationships. For physical intimate partner violence in the past 3 months, neither women nor men showed any significant change, although men's perpetration of intimate partner violence is showing a downward trend over the 12-month period. But when we look at women's experience of sexual intimate partner violence, we see a significant decline in that over the 12-month period. And when we look at the measure of physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence in the past 3 months, we also see a significant decline reported by women, but not in men. Men did not report any change in their perpetration of non-partner sexual violence either. In terms of more health and HIV indicators, what we did see is that men reported a significant decrease in their measures of symptomatic depression, whether it be moderate or severe. They also reported less suicidality over the 12-month reporting period. Both women and men reported improved life circumstances. They felt their lives were better at the end of the 12 months than at the start. In terms of alcohol problems, we had a bit of a mixed picture. The men showed no increase in reporting or decrease in reporting problematic alcohol use. And that, in many ways, is a positive outcome, given that one of the concerns about involving men in economic and kind of strengthening interventions is that they'll go and spend it on alcohol. For women, however, we did see an increase in problematic alcohol use in the past year. We're not sure exactly why that happened, but one thing that did happen is that women didn't argue as much with their partner about alcohol use. So we seem to have a few kind of competing trends within that. Men also reported in the 12 months an increase, a statistically significant increase in ever having an HIV test. And importantly, over the 12 months, a greater proportion of men reported that the last person they had sex with was their main partner. And that rose from 50% at baseline to 60% at the 12-month follow-up. But this had no impact on reported transactional sex in the previous month, nor condom use at last sex. For women, there was no change in who they had sex with, nor condom use, nor transactional sex. So we have some interesting but mixed picture findings. So really, just to summarize the main outcomes, young people had higher monthly incomes by the end, more shock resilience, and felt less stressed about work. This was reflected in men with less depression and less suicidal thoughts and a higher perceived life satisfaction. In terms of gender relationships, men became less controlling, had more equitable attitudes, and reported having sex more often with their main partner, while women experienced less sexual and/or physical intimate partner violence. This really kind of adds to the growing body of literature that supports the argument that women require structural interventions such as economic empowerment in order to be able to benefit from gender empowerment interventions, and also suggests that there may well be a number of positive outcomes for including men, which many interventions haven't looked at. To reiterate the limits of it, there was no control group and it was a small number of participants. There was also significant variation in baseline measures between our 0 and 2-week reports, which points to the continued challenges in self-reported measures that all kind of behavioural interventions face. And we also had a short follow-up of only 12 months. Ideally, we'd want to look at follow-up at 24 months or longer. So our key messages are that structural interventions are possible without microfinance or cash transfers. Scale-up of these interventions for young people is more feasible. And creating futures may well have strengthened the impact of stepping stones for women. Really, the combined creating futures and stepping stones intervention needs to be subject to a future impact evaluation, but shows promise as a way of assisting the very hard to reach young people of informal settlements. And just to recognise and thank our participants, field workers and the facilitators and our funders. Thanks.